I'm David Crossley. I'm president of Houston Tomorrow. God, I did it. I didn't stumble over Gulf Coast Institute. And thank you all for coming tonight. This is going to be very, very interesting stuff. Neal Peirce is one of my heroes, and as a writer, if you get our newsletter, we try to link to everything he writes, so you can get plugged into him that way. And also this little yellow thing, which I think we're going to be passing around, tells you how to sign up to get his column that comes out every week from CityWire, from the City States Group. I want to start, before I talk about Neal again, I want to thank the Anchorage Foundation of Texas, Ann and Peter Brown, for funding this Distinguished Speaker Series, and which will continue. Our next speaker will be tomorrow night, and it will be Mark Winnie, who is a food activist and a writer and author who's written a book called Closing the Food Gap, that's right, about food security. And it'll be right here, same time, same place, same situation. And then on Friday morning, is there anybody here who knows the time? The Houston-Galveston Area Council will have a meeting where he'll be there to talk about starting a food policy council in the Houston region. And I don't remember the time. Jay? Gone? No? Well, we'll get that for you before this is over. And then on the 22nd of January, we're going to have Peter Newman, who's an Australian researcher who has done all of this unbelievable work on the idea of activity intensity and how you reduce car dependence in cities where that's already the case, and what it takes to do that. So that's going to be a wonderful event, and I'm sorry I'm not going to be here for it, but I hope you all will be, and you'll be getting more about that as we go on. I want to also thank Bob Urey and Central Houston for sponsoring this event tonight. Bob, you're here somewhere. There you go. Thanks very much, and for apparently setting up regal quarters for Neal at the Hilton Hotel. Thank you very much. I just want to mention something that happened today. A few of you were at the Texas Lyceum conference out at Reliance Stadium today. It was about transportation infrastructure, and it was kind of a heavy-duty event, and it was trying to get ready for the next session of the legislature to take some priorities and so forth about transportation. And I think the sort of understanding was that it would be how to do all the road projects that Texas wants to do. Mostly it would be talking about funding, but it was a very large production with about 400 people, and after each panel they had breakout sessions where the people who were there would sit around and talk about objectives and priorities and so forth. And I've said this to several people, I mean, I'm just really impressed by the wisdom of the people. The crowd went a totally different way, and all of the objectives and all of the ideas for telling Texas what to do in the future. The word road doesn't appear in any of that stuff. Comprehensive plan for transportation for 50 years, you know, was the top desire of all those people. Transit, high-speed rail, regional transit, complete streets, bike paths. I mean, it was amazing. And you know, somehow the wind is blowing in a pretty good direction right now. So I just mentioned that because Neal's going to talk about things like that, I think, and the idea that we have a new administration, we have a lot of new ideas, we have a lot of trouble and issues coming down that you have to sort of deal with, and that mean some kind of sea change. So that's so I'll stop there. So Neal, you know, been a writer for 40 years or more, something like that, and writes his column for the Washington Post Writers Group, and then is it a second one? I guess it is. I seem like I see something a week early, but you can explain about that. But so you can you've read the stuff, or you wouldn't be here. You would know his bio a little bit, and I think you're going to be entertained by this guy, and you're going to learn a lot. So Neal Peirce, thanks. Oh, and has this, I've only flipped through this, I just got it, but the Rockefeller Foundation has printed this book called The Century of the City, No Time to Lose, by Neal and his partner, Richard Johnson. Yes? So there you go. And you can get a copy of it for a donation.
Good evening, and thanks, David. I'm just delighted to be here. I thank you all for coming. I thank Bob for making it possible. And there is a wind blowing. And you put it in interesting ways in your remarks, and I'll try and follow up on that a little bit. By the way, I wish I could be here tomorrow evening for Mark Winnie's talk on food security, because I think one of the most interesting emerging issues is food in regions. And this is an international issue that we touched on in this book. I have a whole section, or several pages, on food security and the necessity of trying to make the great urban regions around the world more self-sufficient and less exposed to food emergencies, which are undoubtedly tied to water emergencies and others going to be part of the future of the globe over the next decades. And that, combined with ideas like if you actually grow some of the food in the same region, you have farmers markets, there's a practical and a social side to it. These ideas there are new winds blowing. Now, for some years, I've been trying to keep an eye both on the metro regions of the United States and how official Washington is dealing with them. So when a few weeks ago, David called me and said, would you speak about the new administration in metropolitan regions, cities and metros, seemed like a pretty straightforward assignment. I'd be able to handle that. But wow. Since then, a man named Barack Obama has been elected President of the United States. And I don't know how many of you, but when that news flashed on the television, something changed in our minds or the way we view the world. In a way I think none of us could fully predict. This man has transformed the tenor of American political life. And it's not just that he's the next White House occupant and already giving press conferences and thoroughly upstaging the incumbent, in between reminding us there's only one president at a time. Everybody assumes he's president pretty much already. Nor simply, I think, is it the fact that a man with African-American blood has been elected President of the United States, which is an event I surely never expected to see in my lifetime and has occurred. The change is more than that. It's basically, I think, an announcement there we're moving from an extremist me generation to a we generation. So let me just set a little historic context to this. I was a kid during World War II, and I can recall how absolutely unified everybody was in the country about defeating the Axis. We accepted rationing, all sorts of inconveniences. I imagine myself part of the war effort when I tagged along with my mom with binoculars to peer into the sky and try to spot Nazi planes attacking rural Pennsylvania. It was the time of an America of all hands on deck, Rosie the Riveter's style commitment. And it's interesting, I think American society kept its cohesion for quite a few years after the war. We extended ourselves, we did proud with measures like the GI Bill, which created educational opportunity of immense magnitude in building our economy and our society. We helped house America with federal mortgage assistance, although we had a little difficulty figuring out how we do that for everybody of every race, but still, we did a lot of that work. In the 1950s, President Eisenhower persuaded us to approve the interstate highway system, which fueled our economy in sensational and lasting ways, mostly positive, not entirely. In the 1960s, we made, I think, very important steps as a society that we just needed to, given our history with the Civil Rights Revolution. But then it seems to me, as we prospered, and as our television and air conditioning drove us off our front porches and back inside our houses and apartments, and private automobiles and suburban distances increasingly separated us in our daily lives, we sort of drifted apart psychologically. Pro and anti the Vietnam War and the Iraq Wars divided. Ferocious anti-tax sentiment. Red and blue states. Faceless malls rather than main streets. College getting ever more expensive. Talk of an ownership society contrasted to increasing divisions between rich and poor at the very moment we had that conversation. and all the while increasing inattention to the public realm, to our natural environment, to our physical infrastructure, from schools to bridges to waterworks, roads to rails, to sewage treatment, all the kinds of basic things that we all depend on to assure safety and quality of life. We just let it drift. It costs money. Not interesting. Leaving us with an infrastructure debt now, modestly estimated by one of the Engineers Society at $1.6 trillion, and that was 3 or 4 years ago, so it's undoubtedly higher. An infrastructure deteriorating, in the words of a key congressional committee chair, Peter DeFazio of Oregon, deteriorating towards third world status while our competitors around the world are leaping ahead. Of course, we've had a share, and I think a pretty good share at times, of courageous and smart governors and mayors and other local officials. Not all the time, but often enough. We've had a vigorous nonprofit sector, a really fine nonprofit sector, healthy philanthropy. One reason I began my own career as a Washington reporter and then switched away from it and started covering things happening in states and cities wasn't just disillusionment with Washington, starting especially with the Watergate era when I said not another day of who did what. Rather, it was the variety and the fascination and all these resourceful initiatives that were happening at the state and city and even at the neighborhood levels. We've done a lot in those directions. And then the potential of metro regions. We got, my colleague and I, invitations to do series for newspapers on the major problems and challenges in individual metropolitan regions. We've now written about 25, I think, such reports, starting with 1986 in Phoenix, and a report for the Charlotte Observer, which we're publishing at this very moment. In the mid-1990s, after we'd done several of these, we thought we'd throw them together in one book, and then we said, what does it all mean? We said, well, goodness, these are the city-states of the modern world, our metropolitan regions. The idea that each metro region between all these supposedly divided governments has shared economies, shared environment, a shared global image. Houston, oil and gas, we have images to the world. The challenge of the 21st century, we've been saying, is to build metropolitan regions that are not only competitive economically, but environmentally sustainable and socially equitable. The three critical E's: economy, environment, and equity, and how necessary it is to pull them together. What's more, we believe city-state regions have the capacity to meet those kinds of goals, and that while the top level of talent to deal with the array of national challenges may well have been lodged to a good extent in Washington a generation ago, that's no longer the case. That today the best talent is to be found in the metropolitan centers and their creative new partnerships and idea organizations like Houston Tomorrow, bringing together best skills and ideas from people engaged in government, in corporations, universities, citizens. The collective intellectual and potential willpower of regions is just immense. I think we've just begun to tap it. Yet as much as regions may advance, we also need the glue of national leadership. I remember John Nesbitt telling me a few years ago, remember he had written a number of those great books and given us the high-tech, high-touch slogan. He said, we really don't need a federal government. Well, in the last few years, I feel I've learned otherwise. And I think like any family or company, we do need to plan forward as a nation. Such ideas were out of style for quite a while in Washington, starting with President Reagan and through the two Bushes and their electoral majorities focused on southern and heartland states and affluent suburbs. Government was often held up as the problem, not the solution, not a common entity that we had, but something out there that was different from us. Those presidents helped fuel suburban sprawl through policies that kept gas prices and fuel efficiencies low and favored roads over public transportation pretty systematically. The interregnum of the Clinton administration did very little to reverse those policies. But with Obama, we have our first truly urban-oriented president in many decades. My goodness, a community organizer? Do you remember Rudy Giuliani sneering over that prospect at the Republican convention? Well, community organizing won the presidency. It was an interesting phenomenon. You learn how to organize, you know how to work pretty well. But he's coming into office with, I think, with a mandate, not just from cities, but suburbs and more highly educated voters turning more democratic. So there's a little bit of a political turn in the country that isn't just him, but which he's taking advantage of. We'll still hear, I imagine, from people who consider it sort of socialistic to say, well, at this point, we should plan forward as a nation. Planning? Wouldn't want to do that. Yet I think, and I've been learning, that the anti-planning idea really doesn't have history on its side. Historian Robert Fishman, University of Michigan, points to the expansive Gallatin Plan. Gallatin was the Secretary of the Treasury under President Jefferson in 1808. Their goal was to settle the West with citizen farmers, and they wanted systems of canals and new roads. Well, a lot of that got stifled. We did build the Erie Canal, but a lot of the good ideas got stifled through the division of the states leading up to the Civil War. But the spirit of democratic Western advance was realized in the Homestead Act, which President Lincoln signed in 1862, which would make millions of people equity owners in our society. 4 decades later, in 1808, note we're always dealing with years ending with 08, Theodore Roosevelt's clarion call for natural resource conservation. He called the governors of all the states to the White House to talk about that idea. That led to the founding of the National Governors Association. It was their first meeting. Also, Teddy Roosevelt's initiatives led to the National Park and Forest Systems, and under his cousin, Franklin, the Tennessee Valley Authority and sister projects of the 1930s. Planning, national planning, if there ever were such a thing. Indeed, under FDR, the Natural Resources Planning Board sketched out a nationwide system of superhighways that eventually became, under President Eisenhower, the interstate system. So the question is, will 2008, like 1808 and 1908, mark an historic departure? A new willingness to exert ourselves for the greater nation and to value our shared government and its uniting power. We did elect a president who told us there are no red states, no blue states, just one United States. Pretty shocking statement. We're at least at the start of a recession that could be grave and lasting and incredibly difficult to deal with. I think it's fair to say that it was some pretty greedy economics that led us to it, a lot of the me culture. What we do know is that the anything goes free market fundamentalist approach to how to regulate or not regulate institutions has come to a crashing end. Extraordinary federal intervention in the markets has already occurred, and undoubtedly a lot more of it is to come. At the same time, we have this sort of charismatic new president, and in one respect, a real treat, a man who speaks in whole sentences and appears to have a first-class intellect. Usually you don't see that. That's amazing. Now, for federal relations with regions, this could be sensationally good news. During the campaign, Obama made specific pledges to a city and metropolitan agenda. He bemoaned our crumbling roads and bridges and aging water and sewer pipes and faltering electric grids. He did talk about a 10-year national infrastructure bank effort, at least $60 billion worth, to move road and bridge and airport and rail and other metropolitan area projects forward. Plus, underscoring the forward-looking investment theme, he told a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, quote, yes, we need to fight poverty, fight crime, but we also need to stop seeing our cities as the problem and start seeing them as the solution. Because strong cities are the building blocks of strong regions, and strong regions are essential for a strong America. That is the new metropolitan reality, and we need a new strategy that reflects it, he said. Well, I like that quote. Sounds like pure city-states theory to me. And in the last year or two, the Brookings Institution has certainly picked up the message very strongly, making a lot of point that fully 70% of Americans do live in metropolitan regions these days, or that just the top 100 metros account for 65% of our national population, but 77% of our knowledge economy jobs, or 83% of our R&D funding, or 96% of our venture capital funding. Like cities across time and continents, the message is that today's metros are unquestionably our prime wellsprings of innovation, investors, higher learning, advanced research, profitable businesses. Metros harbor our key economic clusters. They're what makes this country tick. So federal policy really ought to work off that reality. And there's one possible formula articulated by Bruce Katz of Brookings, better than anyone else. Just imagine, he has said, if the federal government said to Greater Denver or Greater Dallas or Greater Cleveland or Greater Charlotte, could have been Houston, show us a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lower your carbon footprint from combined changes in housing, transportation, land use, and energy, and then we will provide additional resources as well as new powers to align disparate federal programs. Really a different way of thinking about governance in this country, and an exciting one because it responds to where the potential, actual or potential creativity lies. Certainly would, I think, stimulate local alliances, get a lot of people together who maybe wouldn't naturally come to the table together. You know, a little bit of bait helps. And because it would help us combine critical national goals with informed response to the level of today's real city, which is the metro region. I think we need to remember and keep spreading the word that cities in their metro regions can be and should be the focus of federal policies on energy and infrastructure and housing and the environment. A vision of focusing our resources for high returns because, as urban writer Bruce Fisher put it recently, cities are about density. Density fosters creativity. Density requires civility. Density enjoys efficiency. Density stimulates innovation, a sense of shared purpose, distinctive regional identities, and creates wealth as well. So, what might that mean? Well, I suppose it gets a region like yours, for example, to start thinking seriously about climate issues and CO2 emissions of the greater Houston region and where they stand and where they were 10 years ago and where they're going and how they compare to other metropolitan regions and what to do about it. And making a number of issues merge for radically increased impact. Making your region's new light rail lines be combined with initiatives to create transit-oriented nodes. I understand that. A lot of talk about that already, and maybe some action. And make sure that those nodes include not just fancy retail and condos, but also some housing for working-class people. So we start to break down some of the housing income segregation in this country. Maybe schools built back into the heart of communities, not at auto-dependent fringe locations with huge parking lots, or provision for close-by walking and biking trails and Victory garden-style garden plots, individual ones to encourage exercise, and maybe people get people's bodies working a little bit, and work on combating today's most alarming health trend, which is undoubtedly obesity and the incredible threat to people's well-being and future individually people's well-being, and through them, then our government budgets in the future. We're really bankrupted by the weight problem. We've had, I think, 60 years of scattered, wasteful, land-consuming, highly energy-demanding development in this country. We can't save energy or reach the goal that many have enunciated of 80% reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 unless we do change pretty radically. Wise set of federal incentives could help regions across the country reach those goals. I think it needs to be both and, not either or. Now, if that's the ideal, and the Obama crowd, unlike the current administration, appears to grasp the stakes and is willing to forge a new path, what's the administrative way to get there? Obama has promised to create a White House Office of Metropolitan Policy to coordinate various agencies' policies that are related to urban America. That certainly in itself is a big and a critical step. Now, as interesting as all that sounds, until recently, we didn't know where would the money for any kind of real metropolitan initiative come from. Where's sufficient funding for any kind of serious infrastructure effort? Well, in a strange and perverse way, we now have an answer. It's the gigantic new economic stimulus bill, the new one still to come, maybe $700 billion, that the Obama administration intends to enact by some rumors on the afternoon of January 20, 2009. There'll be many elements in that package, and I think it's still lots of moving parts and indecision involved. Based on Obama's meeting with the nation's governors yesterday, it seems all but sure to include a major amount of cash infusion to state and local governments that are around running deeply in the red, in the process shrinking their services and laying off workers and making the recession all that much worse in their areas. The automakers, as we know, are making a serious pitch for an emergency transfusion. The question is whether their proposals will lead to the energy-efficient, high-tech autos that the times demand or not. Obama is interested in developing new energy grids and, of course, the wind farms and major solar installations he refers to often as one pillar of his vision of 2.5 million new green jobs within the next couple of years. And then there will be infrastructure, likely a very large amount. The recession is clearly so deep that the time for $300 checks to everybody is over, that it's time for serious projects that create both short and long-term blue-collar work with ripple effects across the economy. A true national infrastructure push to prepare this country for 21st century global competitiveness is what we need. Conceived in 2008, passed in 2009, this could be, and I'm not sure how much, but I think the possibility is there, a parallel to the Gallatin Plan and to Lincoln and the Homestead Act and to TR and FDR and to conservation and dams and to the interstates. It's $700 billion is quite a bit of money. Even a seventh of it is a lot of money. It's quite possible this single piece of legislation will really within it carry a large share of Obama's entire domestic agenda. Because, as we all know, the window opens for a little while to do really radical and different things at the beginning of a new administration, the president and Congress of the same party. And especially when these wild Democrats take office, they tend to do more than the Republicans do by nature. But you can expect some struggles. There will be a lot of dialogue, especially over which projects, infrastructure projects, are shovel-ready or close to it for fast impact. The highway folks report they're ready to launch 3,000 highway and bridge projects for, well, the first figure I saw was $18 billion, but I think it's rising. Hard-pressed transit agencies, with their, interestingly, with their ridership up 32% since 1995, very, very hard-pressed for cash, say they could mount 559 improvement and repair projects within 90 days. Plus 58 new and expanded public transit lines at $25 billion cost could move into construction within 4 months to a year. And $325 million worth of bicycle and pedestrian projects are ready to go. Well, it's true that not all of those projects are smart ones. It's a safe bet, I would say, to the 3,000 highway projects, there's a pretty good share of bridges and roads to nowhere, like expanding rural two-lane roads that do their job perfectly well to 4 lanes because a local legislator would like to have that on his political resume. So it will be extremely difficult to do. And it'll be very important to set stiff, I think, fix-it-first criteria. For example, early attention to really imperiled bridges and seriously decayed subway lines and roads and leak-plagued water systems and schools crying out for basic maintenance and repairs. There is danger, given the timing of what's happening now, that the new White House and Congress, in a rush to act, could overlook some of the basic metropolitan issues. The policy team of macroeconomists that Obama has put first into place may be tempted just to turn large chunks of cash over to state departments of transportation, thinking that's a quick way to get movement going, without asking enough questions. So regionalists, I think, should insist that the states, at a minimum, be instructed to use mode-neutral measures to decide among federally funded road and transit projects. That in itself would be quite a revolution, and that they employ the 3 E's filter, evidence that a project is not only stimulating the economy but has its benefits for the environment and is equitable in a social sense. Beyond that, the case, I think, should be made for tunneling major chunks of the stimulus cash directly to the existing metropolitan planning organizations. They need some reform. They also need money. They need instructions to give priority attention to such Obama priorities as public transit funding, biking and walking, and other automobile alternatives, maybe even connections to affordable housing. Another agenda, extremely important for metros, supporting Amtrak, but concurrently building a set of rapid passenger and freight rail lines in major regions of the country. That could go forward, although it takes longer to do. By the way, I was interested to hear what Vice President-elect Joe Biden had to say when he and Obama met with the governors in Philadelphia yesterday. Don't know if you saw the quote. Here it is. China, he said, invests 7 to 9% of its GDP in infrastructure projects, but we invest just 1%. There's a reason they have a maglev train that can go over 200 miles an hour. I may have a bit of a pro-rail bias, said Biden, and you know he rides back and forth, or has historically, to Wilmington every night. But think of the jobs we could create in both construction and innovation if we made similarly bold investments here. Well, I can tell you that after 30-some years of writing columns urging serious investment in our rail systems, statements like that are sheer music to my ears. What we need are fast train systems within each of the mega regions of America. The Northeast Corridor, the Great Lakes states, the Texas cities, South Piedmont, California, Florida, and so on. Systems that connect a mega region's central cities, but also their airports, so that rail can substitute for short-haul air flights, reduce air congestion, deliver serious reductions in carbon emissions, and by their centrality, bring more economic activity towards centers rather than dispersed, as highway projects tend to do. Well, at any rate, Biden will be at Obama's right hand, and I don't think he will forget his message, and I'm just absolutely delighted that he's there to keep giving it. But back to the omnibus bill. It could even pick up on proposals to speed our freedom from foreign oil and stimulate new made-in-USA technologies by increasing the federal gasoline tax from its ridiculously low 18.5 cent a gallon level to a minimum of 150 or 250 or whatever figure you could negotiate. The fiscal hit could be combined with rebates to consumers in lessened income tax or earned income tax credit allocations. But only at such a moment of when you have this window open can you do something as radical as that, whereas legislators, national and state, are usually cowardly about a 2-cent increase. This is the time you could do something substantial by presidential message that we face a national long-term and deep, unavoidable energy emergency given our energy appetites, and we need to find a new way to really stimulate the new sources. Now, in normal times, we couldn't even dream of that kind of legislation passing, but as Governor Granholm of Michigan has been saying recently, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. This could be, much like FDR's first 100 days, an incredible window of opportunity I think is opening. With luck and care, we could refashion the compact between Washington, the states, cities, and metro regions for the long-term future. We could indeed start rebuilding our long-neglected infrastructure and perhaps even fulfill the Obama dream to, quote, free our nation from the tyranny of foreign oil and saving the planet for our children. Adding in some of his hopes for health care reform and improving education for our children, Obama, in remarks November 15th, reminded us of our rekindled national vision. Doing all this, he said, will require not just new policies, but a new spirit of service and sacrifice, where each of us resolves to pitch in and work harder and look out not only for ourselves, but each other. If this financial crisis has taught us anything, he continued, it's that we cannot have a thriving Wall Street while Main Street suffers. In this country, we will rise and fall as one nation and one people, and that is how we will meet the challenges of our times. For me, that says it all. A pretty rare opportunity to start remaking a nation and its heritage, a time until a few months ago I didn't think I'd ever see. And I sort of was sad about that. But what we need now, clearly, are regional collaborations like your own, contacting your congressional delegations and the Obama team, pressing for constructive action, and defining the clear and positive ways that a city and a region like yours can benefit not singly, but as part of a nation that does well. Yes.
You may not want to refer to it, but it happened today. I wonder what you think of the auto industry bailout.
The question is, what do I think of the automobile industry bailout? Was it announced today? I don't know what.
They were there.
They were there today asking for it. Yeah. Driving their cars instead of their jet planes, individual private jets to Washington, which I thought was very nice move on their part. Understanding towards the rest of us. I have a feeling that we need to do something fairly substantial, but I certainly want to see very stiff terms exacted that really try to take that industry and put it on a forward course. We are moving past this. Our economy is such a size, and some of these, like the automobile industry, is of such size that just saying goodbye, 3 or 4 million jobs is not an acceptable course. But if we're going to do the subsidies, we really need to be thinking very hard about how the new arrangements really put us on a course towards the future. If we're going to have state socialism to some degree, let's make sure it's smart state socialism, not really stupid, which could happen without care.
I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, but have you thought about what Obama should do beyond what we're hearing and what we've all read about and so forth? I mean, I'm cooking up a gigantic fantasy of a brand new world. I'm sure you are too.
Well, I mean, of course, we all have high hopes, and we know with any figure at any time there are going to be disappointments and shortcomings. And he himself has been warning about that. I think internationally, as we've already noted, his election has had a pretty good impact on American imaging around the world. I have felt personally that a new approach on international relations, which is more based towards high degrees of intelligence gathering and consultation and bargaining, short of any kind of military action, is what we have to do. Hillary Clinton seemed to be somewhat on the more hawkish side of that, but I think that Barack is going to put her on course. Now, how big and dramatic a change this is going to be, I'm not sure, but I think it's one we absolutely had to make in terms of our international positioning. And I hope understanding that while we can help in many places, in many situations around the world, we're not a superpower to the degree that we were, and we can't be the arbiter and the decider of every situation. And a lot more of it has to be bilateral, multilateral across the country, across the world. So that's what I hope for on the foreign side, and I do think that the symbolism of having a African American president is just wonderful because it underscores the best of our country after several years in which people interpreted us as being pretty bad. On the domestic side, I think I've sort of covered the areas that I think are of most interest, but there are other big ones like healthcare and education. I think I'm worried about whether we have the financial resources to do all these things. Even he yesterday, talking to the governor, said, "No, we can only. I don't want to get just into printing paper, and printing dollars." But I think the question is how you bring really good analysis and smart moves that create value. And the reason I'm fairly hopeful is he seems to have this really fine ability to get, as he says, lots of people into the room, differing points of view, and doesn't tell people at the same meeting what he's decided, but they find out later. So he takes it back and he cogitates and comes up with an answer. So I'm hopeful this way. Yes?
I share your love of urbanism and transit and walkability, and I'm hopeful towards all that. But I too was at this transportation conference all day today that was a room full of hundreds of engineers who were also slavering over the possibilities of economic stimulus to invest in infrastructure. And they're not talking about urbanism. They're talking about roads and more roads and kind of more of the same. My question to you is, what advice do you have for friends of urbanism about what we should do in the next 90 days to help make sure that the economic stimulus does what we hope it will do?
Very good question. I mean, part of it is talking to all those you know in the political system about using the money extraordinarily well. And I think it's a little bit disarming to come at them and say, let's use this to do the infrastructure we need to do, but do it in the places where we get more than one benefit out of it. Otherwise, we're wasting money. You don't want to waste money, do you? So I think the multi-purpose is a strong part of it, and I would like to see the issues of energy efficiency, parentheses, carbon emissions, part of all of the debates, and when people come up, it would be very good to have research done at the state and local level on projects proposed and what are their energy and carbon implications, and the comparison between them, and getting that kind of material and research done early and out publicly before public agencies can say, we're going to do this one. Those are my first thoughts. Yeah.
I'm very excited about the prospect of having revitalized infrastructure, but very nervous, especially using Houston as an example of what could happen with lack of coordination if all these infrastructure projects happen at the same time. Are there any places to have hope from what you've seen around our country, or places that we can look around the world where they've done major infrastructure improvements and coordinated it well?
Well, the Brits have done something interesting in the last couple of years called, they had an Eddington study. Sir Eddington was, the Brits have these noble people who walk in on center stage and suddenly do the right thing. And the Eddington study basically said that you should have a mode-neutral method of analysis of all proposed transportation projects. And it was mostly on economic efficiency, but also had a carbon energy side to it. So those suggest that idea of picking carefully based on advantage is very attractive. I have to say that the devil is in the details. How much of it is economic efficiency, and how much of it is mobility, and how much of it is the environment, and which one tramps on the other, and what's the balance. But I like the basic idea of mode neutrality, and it's being discussed some in the transportation field now. And I did notice with great interest, we know that typically road projects have received 80% federal funding and transit 50%. And I saw a representative of the National Road Builders Association saying he'd like to have mode neutrality now. When you've had a great advantage, then you're willing to go to mode neutrality. But we need some kind of systems. I'm leaving that aside. We need to think about the ways and have as early and strong a debate as possible about how you use monies well and what their impacts are. That's all I can say to that. Not easy. And there are real risks involved that should make some bad decisions. I'd like to see, really healthy national debate about this as the projects are discussed, rather than just going into a bureaucracy and suddenly coming back out again with decisions. I know people will say that's delay. You could also set up some criteria where some things, if they meet every checkpoint, can go fast, and others have to wait for a little bit more time for decision. And the discussion now is, we want some very quickly, but since we think we're going to have the new administration saying we need to have a flow of these over 2 years, because this economic crisis won't resolve itself soon. So that means you could have some involved that are more time-wise down the road. Yes?
There was a question raised today at the conference that several attended concerning the distribution of infrastructure budgets and funds. And I think underlying this was the fear that if the infrastructure funding is distributed through the states, that due to the political process that's involved in many states, that the Metropolitan planning organization areas will not get their fair share of the infrastructure budgets that are going to hopefully evolve with the new administration. Do you see any hope that bailing out the states, as far as their current budget deficits is concerned, will be separated from the funding of infrastructure projects in the metropolitan areas if we do have a metropolitan area-oriented presidency?
See, I just don't know the answer to that yet. That's the right issue. How much goes to the state? How much is instructed to flow through to the metropolitan planning organizations? I just don't know the answer to that. And I think that's important to get into that debate very early. And I raised in my own talk the danger of just turning it over to the state DOTs. And what I didn't point out was that we have these I did point out we have the macroeconomists who think, what's the quick way to make it work? But we don't yet have a secretary of transportation or a secretary of HUD and some of these other agencies who are more likely to put a little bit of a foot on the brake and say, let's make sure that it's distributed in a way that does the most good for the society. And that's in the tempo of the way things have been resolved since Obama's election. First thing he did was the national security team, was his economic team. Next is national security. Now he's coming to the others, but it's more slowly. And I don't know whether those other people will be in place early enough to really influence the process or not. And that's what is the real concern of a number of people in Washington who want to see the metropolitan regions play a major part in this. I mean, we also need a major rethinking of metropolitan planning organizations and how they function. They sound great, and Patrick Moynihan was a brilliant senator in coming up with the idea, but they have problems of equity and representation. They have problems in a lot of log rolling that takes place in many of them. They lack a clear focus very often as to what their priorities ought to be or how they judge their priorities. And I hope we can have, as part of the transportation reauthorization next year, a lot of debate on that, but that's not something you do overnight. That takes quite a while.
Have you heard any rumors about who the transportation secretary might be?
Well, Heminger from the Bay Area, or Earl Blumenauer from Oregon, are a couple of the names that have been raised. But I think I have not heard about anybody having the inside track yet. Yes?
When we talk about this economic problem being over, what does being over mean exactly? Are we ever going to be back to where we were before?
And that's a very interesting question. Will we ever be back to where we were before? Do we want to go back to where we were before? That's what caused the problem. Part of what we Americans got involved with was a really frenetic consumer-based economy. We talk a lot about the greed on Wall Street and other quarters and some corporate boards. But the consumer economy, which is always more and more and more, and there's very little balance in it, raises questions about a sustainable society. And I don't know the answer to that. But I think we should have a pretty good debate about what we want to come back to and use an opportunity of the downtime to discuss it. I don't pretend to be able to stand in front of you and say what the right balance or economic direction ought to be. We count GDP to include making of a wondrous new product and sewing up the bodies that were torn apart in an automobile accident. I mean, it's not a very good measure when you really think about an economy's progress. And so we need to somehow, I think, really challenge these big figures of the more the better and think about quality. How, I don't know. Yes?
You've written about food and agriculture issues?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and Michael Pollan wrote a really eloquent thing.
Oh, wasn't that great, that New York Times piece? Yeah.
So I'm interested in whether you think Obama's interested in food and agriculture. I haven't heard a single peep about any of that.
I have not either. And I don't know whether he's going to take Pollan's suggestion of taking several acres of the White House lawn and making it into a victory garden or not. And the other idea was that he and Michelle and the kids would go out and do a little weeding now and then. But I think it might appeal to him. I mean, it's not, if not the garden, at least I think the ideas it fits in with the general push of a more mutually supportive society. And I think it makes just common sense, while I don't think we're going to stop international shipments of food, to have a larger base within the metropolitan region itself. And it also says to us that land to graze food has equal value to land to raise subdivisions.
Well, we treat food like a commodity, like it's just, it should always just be there, right there. And that's not how it's been for most of human history.
And no, it has not been that way through most of human history. We may go back to human history. And the human condition has not always been sort of plastic wrapped and guaranteed. Yes?
I serve a local municipality, and one thing that we've seen in FYOA, especially in the Gulf region, is a decrease in our sales tax revenues. Most of the cities are under budget, and that's a major revenue source for our CIP projects, such as the infrastructure, surface water plants, et cetera. Hurricane Ike didn't help that in most of our sister regions as well throughout the Gulf. With that being said, I'm wondering, how do you manage that conversation with a local council about the dichotomy between your three E's, between your environmental protection versus your desire in our communities to build bills so that we can raise that sales tax, so that we can therefore build roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. So how do you still manage an environmental conversation while struggling for funds?
That's why we have high-grade public officials like you in place to do that. It's tough. It is tough, because the build more and have more tax argument is a strong one. We have at least a couple thousand Walmarts in America built on that philosophy and not doing a lot of favor for main streets. The European system is far more centrally organized and sends money down. Our system puts the premium on raising money locally so you can do more locally. I sort of like the local self-decision part of it, but I worry about this, which has been such a major part of our difficulty of balancing our priorities, the need to raise revenue all the time to do it. And I don't know what the answer to it is. I wish I did.
It presents my council on 16, so. Get back to me before then.
I mean, there are some, on a metropolitan basis. Actually, our City Wire next coming week is a piece by my colleague Manuel Pastor, when they've done some studies. Is equity really drive down an economy, which is the general idea, or does equity actually increase when you make steps for equity in an economy? And he's claiming that it's more. And so I'll commend that piece by Manuel Pastor to you, because it gets into that issue on a metropolitan basis in any event. Yeah. I've noticed that in several states that if you take a careful look at state legislation and interpret it on the environmental, more activist side, it's a much larger body of law and potential precedent, and often is just disregarded. Oh, let's do this project. Well, of course, let's not worry. We'll not take much look at all these other statutes. But that requires a lot of local activism.